But CFM scouting. So, I guess one of the things I think we should address up top is the in-season scouting, right? Namely, spending points to uncover top 3 attributes.
Right.
One of the things we do on TSO a lot is we try to relate that back to real life situations, right? And I think one of the premises around scouting in general was, when you're scouting someone in college, when you're looking at tape, when you're looking at interviews, whatever information you have, generally there's going to be certain things that pop up at you about a player, right? If he's a quarterback, if he's got a strong arm, you're going to see that immediately and you're going to notice it, right? If he's mobile in the pocket, he take off and run, you're going to see that happen. You're going to notice it, right? So I think the top 3 attributes was kind of that, was supposed to represent kind of that, film study type of feedback, right? I look at a guy play 8 or 10 games, I get a pretty good idea of what he's really strong at. And probably, you could probably make the argument you can get an idea of what he's really bad at, right? If you watch 10 games of a quarterback and he throws 20 interceptions, you can probably say that his accuracy is suspect. What do you guys think? Yeah, or decision making, one of the two, which isn't captured in Madden necessarily. Right. But what do you guys think about the top 3 attribute approach? And I guess bolted onto that, what do you think about it being random? Because last year we had a linear scouting process, right? You scouted 1, 2, 3, top, second, third, right?
Right.
So what do you got? How do you guys feel about that? Keller, why don't you start?
I'm sort of I don't know what the right word is, but I miss the old NCAA days, right? So TSO was heavy into NCAA back in the day. And so when you come from sort of that robust of a system and you come to Madden and you're limited by 3 ratings, it just feels like they didn't put enough effort into it. Like it's not that important. And I agree with you that, looking at a player, you can probably, over whatever a certain amount of time, you can figure out what his top attributes are, and that's how the Madden team wanted that reflected in the game. At the end of the day, it's just not enough for me.
Yeah.
It's not enough to satiate my my desire for team building in Madden, which is probably one of the more enjoyable aspects of the whole deal. So I feel like there needs to be more of an emphasis. I'm trying to think as far as the linear progression of, is it his lowest of the top 3 and then up, or is it his highest of his top 3 and then down? I don't recall.
It's highest and down.
Yeah, so
highest and down.
So the problem with that system and the problem with the previous systems where you could choose where to scout. If you had a clipboard and you could say, I want to scout, let's say, speed, which is what everybody did, right? You scout all the prospect speed, you take the highest speed guys, and then you move on to them, or you move forward with them and nobody else really. Right. That's really no fun, and especially if the game is the gameplay of is geared towards fast players, which it was at that point in Madden's history. It just sucks the fun out of it, right? The linear thing, if you scout a guy that's supposed to be a first round grade and his top attribute is a B-, you don't even scout that guy, right? You immediately say that if B- is his highest rated skill, there's no way he's a first round talent. I'm gonna move on to somebody else. So that wasn't a whole lot of fun either, because really you just scout all the A's and whatnot, and it also helped identify gems right off the bat, because you go to a projected fifth round guy, and you you scout his first attribute and it's an A- or an A+, all of a sudden that's a complete indicator that guy's a gem, or he has some dev trait that's desirable. So let's talk about NCAA for a second since you brought it up.
Yeah.
I mean, so NCAA, and God, I haven't played it in several years, it seems.
Yeah.
What I remember is that you have all the attributes available, and you basically hit like it's a randomized scouting button, right?
And it's just like dumping time into them, as I recall, or resources. I don't know if it was time or
It was
points.
hours.
Hours. Okay, so it was time.
Mm-hmm. And I do believe you did get random out of it. I
Right.
can't remember. It's been so. It does feel like ages.
Yeah,
It feels like
it's
decades.
like 3 years at least. I feel like I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, it's certainly been a while. Let's assume that's how it works because that's what I remember. But
Yeah.
I mean, what about that did you like? Because I think the argument on the other side of it is I don't have control over
Sure.
what I'm scouting,
Sure.
right?
But did it not have like a base though? Right. So like you just looked at a player and he had like a base of ratings, or was it all completely hidden from you until you started scouting? So like what I remember about NCAA is there was a nice progression throughout the entire scouting process, week after week after week after week, which Madden is similar in that regard. But the real thing, which I pointed out to Bob, is that the rating it was dynamic. It could change. And I feel like that's something that's totally missing, especially with some of the dynamic stories and stuff that are in Madden now for different players. Like, what if a player gets injured? His injury rating could then change. So maybe you had it scouted before and it was an A, but then he got injured, so it moves to a C. And it wasn't final until late in the process, which is true to life, I feel like, anyway. You're not going to know exactly. I mean, you'll never know exactly how a player is going to be, but you learn more and more about the player until scouting is finalized sort of at the end stages. So I call it fuzzy ratings. So I liked that ratings were kind of, tentative. They changed over time, and I feel like that's something that, again, the NCAA system was so robust. It's missing from Madden.
Bob, what are your thoughts?
I don't mind the 3 attribute thing, but I feel like when I go in and I hit somebody that has an A+, and let's say the guy on the stream, A+ in tackle or whatever, I want to feel like I found somebody, especially if he's like a 5th or 6th rounder. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to feel like every 31 other teams have found the same thing I found. So then I have to like give away everything I have to go get this guy that I think I'm going to get later in the draft. I just feel like I don't even know if random would help that, but I just feel like it's just like Keller said, it's not dynamic. But I also feel like there's not any kind of like misinformation with it either. Like each team's a little bit different.
Right. That's what I'm talking about with fuzzy ratings. I could envision a system where, depending on how many scouts you use, like if you had multiple scouts, multiple regions, depending on how many scouts you use, depending on the skill level of those scouts, which you could tie back in with sort of your coaching ability, your coaching experience, and you upgrade your scouts, or you upgrade other coaching and scouting abilities. But, different teams would have different ratings for players based on how good their scouts were and how many scouting resources they used to really identify, good players later in the draft. So the higher the rated player, sort of teams would be closer on, the consensus of that player's talent. But later down in the draft, when people don't invest as much time and resources into scouting players, maybe that's where you found the gems or whatever of the draft.
Right, because I think you see that a lot in the NFL, right?
Yeah.
I think, the difference between a 4th and a 7th round guy, are pretty pretty minimal, right? I think a lot of times you'll take guys in the 4th round that, or guys in the 7th round that may be just as talented as a 3rd, 4th, 5th round guy, but maybe has a character flaw, maybe has an injury, maybe has something like that. Some type of unknown that says, look, I know this guy can run routes and catch the ball, but I'm not too sure he's not a knucklehead, right? I'm not too sure he can actually put in the work ethic to be an NFL player. So I like the idea of saying, in scouting, I have my scouts that go out and there's some sort of point system or time system, and say, okay, I'm gonna narrow a range down somewhere on these certain attributes, whatever you can get from film and watching a guy play, and even his measurables. The colleges publish them, recruiting services publish them. You have data on these guys, since they were in junior high a lot of times. So
there's a precedent for that in a video game. Like if you played the MLB The Show and you play either online or offline franchise, you do have a team of scouts that go and scout. In that game, it's like scout this pitcher in this region, or these pitchers, like a section of pitchers in this region and catchers in this region. So like, it's not as well organized as maybe Madden can make it, but it's definitely like a baseline of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
FIFA did something very similar where you would send talent agents to certain parts of the world, and you would say, hey, I need you to go find me a striker out of Argentina,
right,
or this area, this region. And actually the players that came back would have a scouting report, and you would choose whether to add them to your academy or not, academy club. So you would say, all right, I found this kid. He's 17 years old. Right now his ratings are somewhere in between this min and max. And I think his potential is here, 70, 80, 90, whatever overall. Doesn't always turn out that his potential is what it is, but I like that idea. I think with anything in Madden, specifically the CFM guys, because they play so much CFM, it's really difficult to get a system that's got enough variance built into it that is easy to use, a system that gives you enough information to make educated decisions about your team, versus having something that's so strict that everybody can game it, right? We had a comment in the chat here. Ackshot says, ideally I think they should fix owner mode and then have scouts that have different accuracy ratings. Good scouts scout players more accurately than bad scouts. It's not perfect, but I think it imitates real life. I think certainly there's a realistic aspect to that for sure. I mean, look at baseball, right? You have guys that stick to certain scouting strategies. Some guys are very statistic based. Some guys are very that gut feel type thing. When they look at he just looks like a ball player. His swing is, he's got a sweet swing, right? So certainly there's things that are more and less subjective in those approaches. Adrian says he loves the regional idea, saying that you can deeply scout certain regions by assigning resources. I'm not, I think if you look at, I think regionally, what we're probably talking about is conferences, right? Collegiate conferences. That's what we're talking about, right?
I think that's fair with the bowl subdivisions as like maybe their own thing. I mean,
because regionally, NFL players come from like 7 places. They come from they
don't come from the University of Texas anymore.
Not lately. But there's a heat map that shows kind of where all the NFL players come from, and it's crazy populated in like Houston, Dallas, SoCal, Georgia, a couple spots in Florida. There's one in Ohio. There's like Michigan, as a whole is like orange. So there's, I don't know that regionally is the best way to do it. And I'd like to actually understand a little bit more, and maybe there's some resources I can tap from EA's side about how, an actual war room is built. So, do NFL teams do scouting regionally, or do they do it by position? My quarterback guy is going and looking at the top 50 quarterback prospects in the draft, right? I'd like to understand that probably a little more and try to take whatever that is IRL and apply it, translate it into the game.
So that's actually an interesting comment in chat talking about creating your own regional pipelines, just like NCAA, where we would just start creating our own pipelines.
What do you mean by I know what it meant in NCAA, but what do you envision it?
So like,
for Madden?
I'm assuming what he's saying is like you're getting so many in the SEC, let's say, everybody will, but you get so many there, so then you start finding more there than somebody that could be to a different school, or maybe you get so many in the FBS. Well, maybe you find a couple of gyms there, stuff like that. I think that's what he's trying to get at.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you would apply that. Adrian has another comment about assigning different level scouts to different levels of college football. So Div 1, Div 2, 3, JUCO, and deciding where you want to spend resources around that. And I'm assuming you could, infer from that if you spend a lot of your time looking at, D1 guys, you're going to be scouted really heavy at the top of the class. If you spend a lot of time in 2, 3, JUCO, your 5th, 6th, 7th rounds and undrafted free agents, which they've got to improve on. We'll talk about that probably in another podcast. But I think anything scouting related has to tie into that, right? Teams, as much as it seems like they kind of just grab bag undrafted free agents, there's actually a ton of strategy that goes into those decisions about who they pursue and who they want to bring in, and it's typical that there's kind of bidding wars. I maybe this doesn't make sense to anybody else, but I kind of relate undrafted free agent, that process after the draft, is like Greek rush, right? Like you as a candidate who's rushing, you have all the maybe one or two Greek societies that you want to be a part of, and then you get offered, right? You get offered a spot, and you can accept that spot, or you could hold out for a different Greek society, but you can only choose one, and a lot of times the offers are expiring kind of real time. And I think that's pretty accurate with undrafted free agents. So
for sure, that needs to be improvement.
So I think another big thing that's missing is right now in the game, all of your measurables are based on combine data. And again, I think a statistical analysis is worth doing here to make some sense of this. But there's players that don't go to the combine, right? Tons of them. Mm-hmm. Namely, every underclassman ever. And then do underclassmen get invited to the Pro Bowl? Or to Indianapolis?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. I was thinking of senior back
but
for some
a
reason.
lot of times they sit out.
Yeah, right.
Draft stock.
Yeah, so redact that statement, retract that statement. But there's pro days, right? That you get a lot more intimate information about a player. You get to sit down with them one-on-one, kind of in a setting they're comfortable with. And then the drills that happen are, typically they're not in a stadium. They're usually in a practice facility or something like that. And you have a much more, I guess, applicable approach to how you evaluate the player. You're on the ground with them a lot of times. And then you have things like the Senior Bowl, the All-Star games, all those things that scouts get a ton of information from, right? Namely the Senior Bowl, because NFL staffs coach those games.
Yeah.
Right? So...
Yeah, most of the time it's like the bottom
Yeah, I don't know how they
AFC and
rotate.
bottom NFC or something like that.
Yeah, the Bills have done it a couple of times over the years.
Yeah.
I know that's how the Cowboys. I mean, that's where they first started falling in love with Dak because they coached him there, and they got to sit down and talk to him, and
Right.
went through that whole process.
Yeah. And actually, it brings up a good point about kind of conflicting data between, say, a pro day and a combine, right? Guy runs a crappy 40 time at a combine and then, makes a pretty good improvement at a pro day.
Why not?
Which happens
Why not have
all
that
the
in the
time.
game?
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Or guys that are hurt for the
Yeah.
I keep saying Pro Bowl, for the combine.
Don't run at the combine. They wait
Right.
till their pro day when they're going to
Exactly.
have all favorable conditions, right?
Exactly. So that kind of brings a different point up for me. Should there be in Madden a difference in scouting between, say, an underclassman, redshirt sophomore, junior versus a senior? Should we know more or less about a player who's played an extra year of college football and is a participant in the Senior Bowl versus a guy that's played, 2 seasons, 1.5 seasons, up to 3 seasons of college football, and then decides to turn pro? What do you guys think about that?
I actually think that's a pretty good idea. I mean, the more experienced you are, the more film there is, the more they're gonna know flaws and everything. They're gonna know more, just more data.
What about you, Keller? You think it's...
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Honestly, I've never thought about that before, but I mean, it's a fact. What's that Trubisky that's coming out this year? He's played 13 games in college football. That's it. And some team's going to take a chance on him. Whereas you have guys that have played, their entire careers, some 3 seasons. Some even play their freshman year. I don't know why it's not reflected in scouting in the game. I think it should be.
Yeah, and I think that's a interesting point too.
What's the downside?
I think the downside is the you don't clear as much of the fuzziness, right? And I don't know. I think that should be there. Maybe other people will disagree with it. I think we're all saying it should be there.
Sure.
I think it's interesting in the case of someone like Trubisky because his draft stock is really high right now. They're talking about taking him number 2 overall. So the risk associated with the fuzziness of the teams that are scouting him obviously is being outweighed by what they consider his potential to be or what they consider his value to be, which is an interesting concept around, when we say fuzziness or when we say, there's wiggle room in the ratings, we're not necessarily talking about devaluing anybody, right? You're just saying that, look, this guy seems pretty good. We feel like his ratings are good. I just don't know if he's a 91 or a 96, accuracy. I don't know that much.
Right.
Or maybe I don't know it within a letter grade, right? Maybe I don't know if he's got an 85 throw power or a 94 throw power.
Right.
I don't know what's...
Or maybe he's just a B, and you don't know if he's a B minus or a B plus.
Yeah.
He's just a B,
Bring back the fuzzy ratings, man. I'm telling you.
I've always wondered how they would ever implement something like the Wonderlic score too.
Yeah, I mean, do you guys really put that much stock in that, though? I mean, if they score really poorly, you have to take it into consideration, but...
I think NFL teams do.
I think it ties into... Maybe tie into stuff like awareness and stuff, I'm sure, but...
Right.
I definitely... it's just another added little thing, another little piece of immersion.
Well, I think I think what Keller was trying to get at, though, is there's really only 3 scores in the Wonderlic. There's the top 5%, which you can make some assessment about the guy, having, some cognitive superiority there. There's the bottom 5%, which are basically the guys that you're going to have to keep from running into poles. And then there's everybody else in the middle that are just like regular people, right? At least that's kind of how I've seen it approached.
I'm not like, can't be talking about Vince Young like that, man.
Yeah, we can. And the same goes for the guys on the other end. Ryan Fitzpatrick's probably the most famous case. Like, he's a marginal talent. He always has been.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, there's a difference. I think in quarterback. I mean, he has. I think.
What did Tom Brady score on the Wonderlic?
Yeah, I don't know.
Goat. What did he score on the Wonderlic?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm certainly not making a case that it means everything in the world, but certainly I think it influences decisions that may or may not be threshold decisions. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Ashshot was asking if there's any statistical evidence. I think there is. I remember reading. I think it was just around quarterbacks. Which I think probably has more correlation. But I think certainly for things like offensive linemen, Mike linebackers, defensive backs, I'll tell you, you got to be pretty smart.
What about a center? What about a quarterback of the offensive line?
No, a center for sure. I think all of the offensive line, it makes a difference. I don't think you can be a dummy and play. Be an effective left tackle regardless of your physical skill sets. But certainly a center, I'll go as far as to say that I think some centers are. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that centers have to be probably some of the smartest people in the NFL. Just based on the decisions they have to make every play. So.
Tom Brady scored a 33 based on what I'm seeing.
It's pretty good, right?
So that's good. It's not, top 5%.
Yeah.
That's about average for quarterback, right?
Yeah, it's Romo 37, Aaron Rodgers 35, Eli Manning 39. So anyway, enough about Wonderlic.
I didn't mean to derail the conversation. Sorry, it was just on my mind.
No, but I mean we're talking about scouting, right? And I think you can make a case that certain things like that should be a part of it. I don't think there's any harm in that at all. So what about? Do you guys think that? Because I believe it's certainly a factor, specifically with top tier talent. But what about adding, medical history, injury type stuff into scouting? And I'll caveat that question by saying that I don't know if EA will ever do that, because, the whole topic of, player health and whatever is such a hot button right now. But if you could, maybe having to do some ambiguous way with the injury rating of understanding someone's medical history, injury history, and how either that plays into the fuzziness of ratings. If a guy's had a knee injury his sophomore and junior year and he's only played running back his senior year, you may not know, or you may not have a good assessment of what his game speed is, like what his field speed is running the ball. And honestly, there's probably a factor there that, maybe that guy wasn't even healthy for his senior year. Maybe he wasn't 100%, and getting into an actual strength and conditioning, professional strength and conditioning program will get that knee back into a place where maybe he's never had it. And he becomes a even more effective running back in the pros than he was in the college.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I mean, I think it adds another layer of realism. I don't see any downside to it. I think with the system they have in place already with the storyline players, it's an easy win. It's an easy win. You add that variable to the player's, story, if you will. The knee injury story, whatever, and then you just toggle. There's a good outcome and a bad outcome, and it just depends on. You could randomize it or make it static for the player. It doesn't matter, but I think it's great. I think it adds another layer to the game. I don't know. They only have so much dev time, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think some things like that are probably easier to model than others. I think adding it into storylines and stuff like that may get a little more complex. But I think if you examine as a kind of a microcosm of what we're talking about, Bob, the second round pick for the Cowboys this year, Jalen,
Mm-hmm.
No doubt top 10 talent, like absolutely incredible linebacker. If you were to translate the decision NFL teams had to make on Jalen for last year's draft, right? Here's a guy that up until that bowl game where he twerked his knee in a I can't even think about it, makes me cringe. Was almost everything you'd want in a linebacker, right? Rangy, athletic, strong, smart, like just had a nose for the football. Played at a high level, at a high competition level. Snaps his knee, at the very end of his collegiate career.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the ratings got a little fuzzy because I think NFL teams probably knew what he was if he were to finish that final game healthy.
Yeah.
Right?
He was projected top 10, if I recall.
Yeah,
I think there was two last year, wasn't there? Wasn't Mac also projected top 10 until he got hurt?
Yeah, maybe. So
Jacksonville.
Yeah, so I think if you look at something like him, I think the ratings get a little fuzzier because you don't know where he's going to come into after that injury, right? If let's say he's an 89 speed linebacker before he gets hurt. And now you're like, well, he could be, when he gets back from a knee injury, he could be an 85, he could be an 89. I don't know. But I think the potential is really where maybe that comes into play. Maybe his injury rating's affected. I think there's got to be some way to capture risk in the draft, right? Because let's be honest, the NFL draft is a complete risk value proposition, right? The Cowboys with Chris Canty, right? Another guy who had
Sean Lee.
I mean, there's tons of examples. Malik Jackson for Jaguars, what was his name?
Wasn't he? Yeah, he plays there now. Wasn't he Denver though?
Yeah, it was Denver originally.
Yeah. So. I mean, there's just so many examples of something like that happening. We may get into draft here, but my biggest deal with scouting right now is that there's very little risk. Like, I don't feel like if I spend my points, non-wisely, if I don't do a good job of spending my points, I'm really not going to get, I'm not going to lose my job over it, right?
Right.
And maybe the rating fuzziness helps that. But
it does. Of course it does.
I think
it solves so many problems. Just get it in the game.
Yeah.
Well, right now it's just button clicks. It's like, okay, I have to do this to compete. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or I have to do this to get somebody I can use in the draft.
Right. So I guess we'll leave it open-ended there. If you guys have any thoughts about certainly around risk and how we can make the draft, the scouting process more dynamic, more fun, right? let us know in the comments below. We'll be sure to get your feedback to the right people or discuss it even further if it needs further discussion. I think scouting's a big. I think scouting could potentially be one of the funnest modes in Madden. It could add a lot of value to Connected Franchise, and whether it's offline or online CFMs. And I think it has a lot of room for improvement. So with that being said, really appreciate the guys in the chat that hung out with us tonight. Love the feedback. Keep it coming. Be sure to subscribe, like our Facebook page, subscribe to us on YouTube, so that you'll get notifications when we go live. Again, we're going to be more consistent with when we do this eventually. Right now, we're just trying to get it in. But take care of yourselves until next time, guys, and then we'll see you on the site.
See y'all later. Thanks for hanging out.